Live from our Boston headquarters, this is Cybba on Display. In-depth conversations on marketing tips, trends, and strategies. Here's your host, Derek Sullivan.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Cybba on Display. Joining me today is Melanie Deziel. Melanie is the founder and chief content officer of Storyfuel, which is a brand content consulting firm. She's also the author of the best-selling marketing and business communications book, The Content Fuel Framework, How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas. I'm digging through it right now. I have plenty of questions. Melanie is also an international keynote speaker, skilled virtual presenter, and is recognized as one of the world's leading experts in native advertising and branded content. We're very excited to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Hey, it's nice to see people face to face, for us to get to chat.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing just audio before, so video is fairly new for me. So yeah, it's a nice touch, right?
It's fun. We're all working from home. Some human time is always good.
Right. Yeah. And where are you? You're in North Carolina?
Yeah. So my husband and I, we lived in New York Metro our whole lives, okay. Tri-state. But right when the pandemic hit and we were in lockdown, we were like, we're going to need more space if we're going to be indoors for the long haul. Our apartment was small. So we figured might as well go somewhere with nicer weather. If we're going to have to be inside, somewhere with nature, we could, go to the park, the kind of access we didn't have in New York. So yeah, we're down in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Wow. How's the adjustment?
I mean, it's tough as it is because you can't go out and explore. We don't have favorite restaurants yet, but we are loving the weather. I've got family back in the Northeast and they're buried under snow and it was 61 degrees yesterday and I didn't wear a coat. So I try not to rub it in, but it is pretty nice.
You are rubbing it in. I mean, right now, today's not bad. It's like 30 something, but we got hit with snow, with so much snow. We're in Boston. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you guys are. I feel like Boston's almost always buried in the winter.
Always, yeah.
Pretty bad.
It's horrible. I don't know why I'm still here. I've been trying to move down south for a while. So yeah, you're
come on down. It's nice.
Yeah. I've heard good things. I got friends in Charlotte. Oh
yeah.
The Carolinas are nice. So where in New York did you guys live, or where?
So most recently, before we moved, we were in Jersey City, right across the river from Manhattan. Yeah. But we had been in Harlem and Brooklyn. I've been in Connecticut. I went to school in upstate New York. So sort of just, tri-state all around.
Okay. Where'd you go to school?
Syracuse.
Oh, nice. I'm from Buffalo originally. So
nice. Not too far.
Barely familiar.
So Boston is actually a downgrade in terms of snow. Like you actually have less snow probably. So
yeah. I came in here like an expert. Yeah. I got this is nothing for me. Yeah. 2 feet of snow. It's
no big deal.
I
remember being shocked when I first got to Syracuse because I grew up in Connecticut. It wasn't quite as bad. Mm-hmm. When I got to Syracuse for school, I remember I think we had 3 or 4 feet of snow and there wasn't a snow day. They were like, no, we shoveled out tunnels. You're good. Go to school.
Yeah. Syracuse. I don't know how they get away with not getting bad press, but they are much worse than Buffalo as far as snow goes. much
snow.
My mom is she's from Utica originally, but she lived in Liverpool, Syracuse for years. And yeah, she was saying they would get 5-6 feet, in a week, it'd be nothing. I don't know.
And it was nothing.
It's crazy.
It's wild. I don't know how they've managed to escape that reputation somehow, but Syracuse is a fun city. It's just, really cold.
Yeah. I do like Syracuse and dinosaur barbecue, although you're in North Carolina now, so you probably have some better barbecue.
It's true. Yeah. And there was a dinosaur barbecue on 125th in Manhattan. So it was a little hint.
Really?
Yeah.
They're still up there?
I don't know if they still are. They were when I was living up in that neighborhood.
I know Dallas barbecue is king in New York. There's Dallas barbecues everywhere, but.
Yeah. But yeah, now I guess we're sort of in barbecue country now. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's sad you haven't had much time to explore, but I've heard, some of the best barbecues in the Carolinas. Before we dive into this, just for our listeners, I'd love to get some, a brief background. I know you were originally in journalism, which kind of helped shape how you come up with content, which I think is really interesting. So I'd love to learn more about that and, how you got into content marketing.
Yeah, well, I started in journalism. I think for me, what was so cool about journalism is that every story was like an invitation to become an expert on something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very much like a curious person, sort of a collector of information and facts. And so I loved that, like, one day I could be writing about sustainability and the next day I'm like knee deep in the original charter of a town and the crazy laws that they have. It was like a really cool opportunity to just continuously learn and then turn around and share that with other people. And I think I was really bummed initially that I wasn't able to find a role in a newsroom that would allow me to continue to do that. But I realized that there was value in taking those skills to the marketing side of the house. And so that was really my transition, was a very savvy recruiter who realized my skill set was well matched to the content marketing arm of the business side of publishing. And so at HuffPost, the New York Times, and Time Incorporated, my job was essentially to help marketers and advertisers speak the language of journalism, help them create content that our audience would be interested in, would engage with. And so it was really fun. I was kind of like taking an editorial approach to marketing content and getting to share what I love about storytelling and content marketing, share that with advertisers and sales professionals who maybe hadn't thought of telling stories in that way. So it's definitely been a fun journey. I think I'm still like a journalist and a storyteller at heart, but it's really nice to be able to have the tools and tactics of marketing to help make sure those stories succeed.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love when you hear stories of like people coming in with like fresh perspectives or maybe like unusual perspectives into marketing. Those are like huge brands that you got to work for. What were some of those initial challenges that you saw, especially coming in with like this new perspective on marketing and content?
Yeah, well, when I first joined, Huffington Post was my first sort of like transition job, my job on the other side. And I will admit that it was at first a tough transition. I think, when you study journalism, you feel very much, at least I did, and many of my colleagues did, that you're almost like a tool of the public. You have this responsibility to enforce laws and accountability, and you're sort of the watchdog. You have you feel this deep sense of like ethics and responsibility to the public. And so it was like a mind shift to suddenly be, I'm working on behalf of brands instead of working on behalf of my audience. That was a little bit of a shift. And candidly, some of my colleagues and professors and, folks that I was close with felt like maybe I was selling out a little bit, and they were not shy about telling me, But I think really my goal was to say, I don't want this to feel like selling out for me or for the audience. Like, I really am trying to take a journalistic, audience-centric approach. And so being able to do that, I didn't feel as icky after a while. Like, once I realized, okay, I can actually make a difference. And if I do this in a way that feels good to my, inner journalist, not only is the content better, but it serves our audience better. It serves the business better. So really, I kind of, after a little while, realized that I could make a difference in that way. And so it felt good. But I would say definitely when you first transition from, the editorial world to marketing, like, there's a lot of terminology that all of a sudden you have to learn. I remember being in meetings, with sales teams and stuff, and just writing like acronyms in the margin, like, okay, KPI, CTA, ROI, having to look up all that stuff after and be like, okay, good. That is what I thought based on context clues. So that was definitely an adjustment, but I think, the thing that really made it rewarding for me, like I said, is just being able to see those light bulb moments happen for clients, for the sales folks that I was working with, to realize like, oh, actually, that would be really cool. That wouldn't feel like we were just shopping the product. I want to read that piece of content. So I like kind of breeding that excitement in people, where they feel like, okay, taking a journalistic approach to this story is actually both strategic and the way to provide something of quality for our audience.
Right. Do you remember some of those like maybe early campaigns that you ran or were a part of that you were really proud of, that you felt like had that integrity that you felt with journalism that maybe you hadn't seen before in brand content creation? Yeah.
Well, I think there were some that were really fun. I remember at Huffington Post, we didn't because we were trying to fit into the context, Huffington Post, at least at the time, was not known for being like intensely reported. It was very much lighter and more entertainment style content. So I got to ghostwrite a piece for Paramount Pictures as Ron Burgundy from Anchorman.
That's fun.
And we ran it in our media news section. So it was clearly labeled and everything. But basically, I got to be Ron Burgundy making fun of the Huffington Post for their news sense, because he has this like old school sensibility about news. So that was actually really fun. It was like meta media criticism in a totally different voice than my own. So that was a blast. But yeah, when I was at the New York Times, that was a very different context. And the stuff we created there was much closer to the journalism that I knew and loved. We were being held to a higher standard. We had to have multimedia content. We had to have, lots of sourcing, the accuracy and fact checking that people expect from the New York Times. We still had to meet those standards. So there was a piece that we wrote for Netflix for Orange is the New Black, their show about women in prison. We did do an investigative piece. We spent like 5 weeks talking to current and former inmates, people who work in prisons, psychologists, prison reform advocates, and wrote this long form piece about what it's like to be a woman in the American prison system and how it's different than men, and some of the innovations and changes that are being made in that space to better rehabilitate and to make it easier for people to adjust back to the outside world, how it affects families. Like, it was very much editorial. I mean, we spoke to Piper Kerman, who wrote the book that the series is based on. But truly, she was a valid source. I mean, she had been through that experience. She had insight that, could add value to the piece in a way that wasn't just talking about plot lines or characters in the show or anything like that. It was really editorial in nature. And so those kinds of pieces, and there were many others like it, those kind of pieces felt really good because it felt like we were kind of proving our point that you could do this in a journalistic way. It still aligns with the brand values. It still drives ROI. But, I felt proud of that piece, that it could have run in an editorial way as well,
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like a hybrid or like a crossover that you would see.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, especially like how, it was kind of, I wouldn't say investigative, but like you said, like a journalistic piece. Was it only just in a writing style format, or did you happen to, so you were able to cross over so how many formats were you able to, do this in?
So I wrote the piece. I would say it was investigative. Like, there were interviews. I spent like 50 hours pouring through government data and all that. Wow. I mean, it was like an intense process.
How long did the project take from like start to finish? Like, was this a project that you led, or were you?
Yeah, so I led this project in part because I had worked with the Netflix agency team back when I was at HuffPost. So I had that existing relationship and trust. So yeah, we worked, I would say from when we got the okay, like the paperwork was signed and we were good to actually start creating, to when it went live was probably 5 to 6 weeks. But it was intense. I mean, there were a lot of us working on it. And the good news is that the other folks working on it also came from a journalism background. So it allowed us to we were of the same mind in the way we approached it. But yeah, so I wrote a long form piece for it using my investigative background. We had a 3-part mini documentary that our video team created. They actually went inside the LA County prison and interviewed current inmates, which was really groundbreaking for us. We had image galleries, infographics. There were some illustrations just to kind of, spice up the page. And there was also audio. So I had recorded all the interviews I did for the written piece, and certain lines or quotes or stories, you needed to hear it in their voice for it to have the same impact. So we were able to embed those clips on the page to have people listen as well.
Very cool. So I don't want to jump ahead here. All of that information is in your book, Content Fuel Framework, as far as these different formats, how to stretch your content across, like you said, audio, image galleries, infographics, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
When you produce that much content, right? That's a sizable chunk of content.
Oh yeah.
How do you plan, or is there a proper way to schedule how to release that? How do you stretch that? Is that in 1 month time frame? Do you recycle over a year? What's the best way to go about releasing that in a schedule?
So the truth is that it really depends on your marketing goals. And I think, in marketing, the answer is almost always, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, they really wanted a big splash all at once, right around the release of the new season. So we actually launched all this content at once on one interactive URL. So it was a giant multimedia experience where you could watch, all these pieces were interspersed, in between one another. So it was a really engaging multimedia experience. Obviously, for all the social promotion and ads that drove to the page, we did pull bits and pieces like statistics and quotes and infographics and images. We kind of used all of that to drive back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in this case, it was all at once. It was like one big launch day. But for many of our other partners, we were doing full year programs where we were rolling things out monthly or weekly. We've done 3 or 6 month programs with weekly content as well. I think it really comes back to the goals. Like, are you trying to make a big splash all at once? Are you trying to create consistent engagement? Are you trying to take your audience along a journey, educating them little by little? So those conversations around the goals I think are some of the most important things to have up front, because that's going to really change the way you want to roll that content out.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. So then jumping into the book then, like I said, I have been trying to do the framework myself, which we can get into. I don't want to embarrass myself too much because I'm not doing as well as I thought I was going to. So before we get into that, what's kind of, the story behind this? What, why did you create it? What was your goal behind it? It's thin, but there's so much in this, right? Like, it's a very easy read. I've gone through it a couple times now, which is, I think unusual for me.
I love that.
Yeah. It's just, a lot of good ideas, and it's so simple to use too, especially like, was a page like 16. Yeah. Like this chart that you have, which obviously you can get into more detail about. So yeah, like what was really, why did you do this?
So if anyone is only listening and you can't see, I'm smiling like a giant goofball, because that's the stuff that I love to hear. That was 100% the goal of the book, was to make it really easy to read, really accessible, and something you could use as a resource to come back to check back, to sort of, remind yourself of things. That was 100% the goal. So it makes me really happy to hear that it's easy for you to use in that way.
Oh, I will be rereading this multiple times. Trust me.
I love when I see pictures with like page flags and highlights. I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Like, let's make it. We tried to put a lot of white space in there for that purpose. But yeah, so the idea for me is, when I was working with clients at these jobs, or, later on in my consulting career, one of the things I kept hearing from clients was that this was like a superpower of mine, to come up with ideas really quickly. And I sort of loved when people would say, oh, we've got no ideas, we don't know what we're going to do. I'm like, yes, let's jump right in. It never worried me. But I realized I couldn't explain why. I couldn't teach that same mindset to other people. And so the book was born out of trying to figure out what the heck is happening inside my brain when I'm rapid fire or coming up with it. And so I realized that I was just asking myself 2 questions. Okay, what's the focus of the piece? And I had sort of a list of options I would run through mentally. And then what format is best to tell that story? And again, I had sort of a list of format ideas that I would run through. And so after a lot of like self-reflection, I realized if I could give people these 2 lists of, here's some common focuses, like approaches or themes you could write your piece through or create your piece through. And then here's a list of common formats, some of the different ways you could bring that story to life. I could give people the tools, the system that I use, and hopefully they could find it as easy to come up with lots of ideas. So that was really the goal of the book, was to try to take that whole rapid content idea generation process out of my head and put it in a very easy to consume format to hopefully give people that same skill.
So before you came up with this chart that's in this book, this was all just in your head before. It was just kind of like
100%
coming up with different ways to release the information and different subjects basically for the information.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes from the journalism background, because, you never see a newspaper that's like, sorry, we couldn't come up with any ideas, we couldn't find any news. You're always thinking, okay, what's a different way I could approach this? Or what questions haven't I asked about this? Who hasn't gotten to weigh in? Or have we talked about the background, the history of this? Have we looked at the numbers? So it really comes like it's instinctive. It's why I couldn't really articulate it until I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So yeah, it was just sort of happening automatically. And I had never thought to break it down and really, put it to paper. What is that process? And so, yeah, it's been really cool I worked on it over time. So I was doing a lot of workshops and keynotes around that time. And so I would tweak it a little bit and then teach it to people and see what worked and what didn't. And I would say, okay, maybe I need to rename this. Maybe this isn't the most clear naming, or maybe I need to combine these two categories and expand these into two different ones. And so it was really an iterative process until I did one workshop. I think it was in like November of 2017 or 18, where it just clicked and everyone was like, this is amazing. I love this. I feel so inspired. And I was like, okay, I think we got it. Like now it's time to document what we just went through.
Right. Yeah, I think like when it comes to marketing, I'm the marketing manager here. I think the biggest struggle is coming up with content, right? It's, you can plan ahead as much as you want, but you have to be reactive too. And you're constantly coming up with ideas, right? How do we engage with our audience? How can we be entertaining and relevant? So it's definitely a struggle. I think this is a really easy way to just kind of, look at, like you said, like these different focuses and different formats and fill in the squares basically. For companies that already have some sort of, content scheduling or, maybe there's like a different format they use and they want to adapt this. Do you have any advice on how to like slowly bring this in or how to supplement some of this stuff with what they're currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the good news is that I'm not prescribing this as like the only system or the only way. My goal is to help people see these are some things that you can do that make it easier, and then for you to sort of adapt it to fit your needs. So the structure in the book is I give 10 focuses, and those are the approaches you could take. For example, telling the story through the lens of people or history or data or process. And then I give 10 formats: video, audio, live video, map, timeline, etc. So the idea is you can choose those that connect best to your business, right? If you are in a very conversion-based business, you will probably create more product-focused content than someone who runs more of a lifestyle business, who might be doing more educational, process, basics-focused content. And same thing, if you have a highly visual product, my guess is you'll probably create more video, infographics, image galleries than someone who's working on something that's a little less visual and harder to make compelling visuals of. If you're selling retirement services or cloud computing, you don't want to go to stock images for that. So you might rely on audio, written content, some of those less visual forms. So yeah, it really is, the idea is sort of, I'm giving you a toolbox. Here are 20 tools that you can use. And then you can select those that best suit your business, your resources, your own personal skills, and kind of create the system that works for you. And again, it's not incredibly prescriptive. You can use this. You don't have to upend your whole content system, right? You just maybe in your brainstorms, you start to ask some of those key questions. Have we tried some of these different perspectives, or could we tell this through a different format? It's really just a way of thinking more so than a way of acting.
Right. It's very flexible, and it's a good way to just kind of like brainstorm, right? Like kind of
exactly.
So I know you kind of touched on this earlier about scheduling, and with marketing, everything is case by case, right? It really kind of depends on what your business is trying to do. But let's say I'm able to fill out all 100 squares, right? 10 by 10, that's a huge chunk of content, right? Actually, let's narrow it down and make it easier, right? Let's say I want to do a focus on people, like in the company, right? You could do, like we do an employee spotlight, where we do like almost like an employee of the month thing. We could do something about like the founder, their background. Let's say I'm able to do all 10 of the formats, right? With the idea of just people. Is there a way that you recommend? And again, I know before you said it really depends on how to release this stuff in a proper schedule, because you can't really, with your audience, you can't bombard them with, here's 10 pieces of content all on the people of our company at once. Because chances are a lot of times that's not going to get the clicks you want, or it'll kind of get lost in the noise. So is there like a good strategy in releasing that?
I think one of the things I always recommend is kind of tying back to your overall business goals and seeing what's going to be the best fit for that. So again, if you're trying to be incredibly conversion focused, then take a look at, you're focused on increasing sales, take a look at those ideas you've come up with and say, well, which of these are going to, get us closer to that goal? We should probably prioritize those. The other way to prioritize would be on impact, right? So if some of these are going to be really engaging and that's what you're focused on, then prioritize those that will have the biggest impact. But I always like to remind people the reality is most of us are working with limited resources of some kind, whether that's staff or tools or time or people, so choose the ones that are most approachable. I would rather have you create 10 written pieces than create nothing for 3 months, because that's how long it takes you to save up to do a video,
Right.
So I think it really is a matter of figuring out what your priorities and your resources will allow you to do. The other thing that I think is important is you don't have to make all 10 of those. Maybe you do one employee spotlight and it performs incredibly well and it's easy for you to make and it does what it needs to do. Well, maybe then you just need to do a different employee spotlight every week instead of even worrying about the others. Right. So, it's really a tool for you thinking of ideas, but the way you select those is going to be based on, again, your own goals, your own priorities, the resources you have, and then hopefully on how well these things do as you start to roll some of them out.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think it really just comes down to like you said, brainstorming, coming up with ideas for this content.
Yeah. Well, and, you made the point about, being able to fill out all 10. Mm-hmm. You could actually do all 10 for an individual person. So let's say you have 3 founders, you could do 10 ideas for one founder A, 10 ideas for founder B, 10 ideas for founder C, right? Then, when you bring on a new person, you could do 10 ideas for them. When you identify some superstar in your industry that's non-competitive, maybe you create 10 different ideas for how you might talk about that influencer. So this kind of process could just be applied over and over again.
Right. Yeah, it almost becomes unlimited at that point. There are 2 formats I want to touch upon in the book.
Sure.
Ones that I would love more information on, just because I think after a while things get stale when it comes to content creation. So you're always thinking of like new ways to provide information about your company. And those 2 are quizzes and maps. So I think these are probably a little bit less conventional than most content creators are used to working with. So can you go into a little bit more detail about those 2, and then maybe some examples, things that like people could try out?
Yeah, for sure. So the quizzes I think are really fun. I think quizzes maybe got a little bit of a bad rap because we see things like the BuzzFeed quizzes that are mostly just for fun. And we're convinced that can't be used as a business tool. But quizzes are really fun ways that you can do 2 things. One, you can test your audience's knowledge of something. This could be really helpful in sort of the early phases of prospecting and qualifying leads. So understanding, how ready are you to make some sort of commitment? How well do you understand what it takes to XYZ, right? You could test their knowledge. You can use the quiz to also place them into categories. So that might mean, what kind of product is right for you. Being able to, let's say you make running shoes and, being able to, or just athletic shoes in general, having people answer a set of questions about, I work out 3 times a week. I mostly work out indoors versus outdoors. I tend to, I have bad knees. I don't know, kind of answer some questions about your preferences, your activities. And then that quiz can turn around and say, based on what you've said, it seems like this might be the right shoe for your needs. Same thing, you could do this with software. You could fill out how many people are on your team and how often do you do this process and what are you willing to spend on to solve this problem, and then recommend this is probably the product and price tier that's the best fit for your team. So those 2 things, either testing their knowledge, in which case you can serve up additional content that fills those knowledge gaps. Maybe you don't really understand what you need in a CMS just yet. So here you go, or in a CRM. So here's some follow-up content to help you decide, or helping them make some sort of decision by bucketing them into different categories, in which case you can then, hopefully chase them for a conversion that best fits their needs. I'm trying to think of exact examples. There's this one is more for fun, but Adobe has a what's your creative type quiz. So you answer kind of a set of fun questions about, I think one of the example questions is a pop-up appears on your screen that says, update now or remind me later. Which one do you pick? And so based on your answer to questions like that, it decides what type of creative you are. Are you a dreamer or a visionary or, something else? And so that's a little bit more fun in that it's just sort of giving you insight. It's like a personality style quiz. But that may tell them a lot about what type of Adobe products are worth following up and marketing to you based on what your needs are, what your behaviors and preferences are. So, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities there. And I think sometimes when we're telling a story, we're trying to convey a message. It's a good way to break out of the norm. And rather than saying, here, we have these 10 products, let's turn it into a quiz and help you figure out which one's right for you.
Right. It's more interactive. It kind of, puts some of the focus on the actual client rather than the company selling, hey, this is what we do. It's who are you exactly,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it can just be fun, that Adobe Creative Types quiz, that can generate a lot of earned media if you do something like that the right way. You get people sharing their results, inviting their colleagues to take it, you turn it into an activity of some kind. And same thing with testing your knowledge. We all this is something we learned at HuffPost, and it was true of BuzzFeed as well. Looking at the data there, it's really about identity. A lot of what we share is driven by identity. I want to share things that make me look smart. I want to share things that tell people what I like and don't like. I want to share things that show who I am as a person. What are my favorite teams? Where am I from? All those different things. And so if you have a quiz like that says, yeah, you're an expert, you know so much about this, of course I'm likely to share it. I want people to know I'm an expert, and that will drive other people in a competitive sense to say, well, I wonder if I know that much. I wonder if I could get the expert score, so there's ways to drive, tap into identity and competition with those kinds of content experiences.
Yeah, it's smart. Kind of creates like that loop, right? And people are going to constantly be coming back. And the second one is maps.
Okay. Yeah, so maps are something that you can definitely use in a static way on your site somewhere. So I think in many cases, the easiest way to implement this is like a map of our locations or, a map of our service area, a map of, the neighborhoods where we deliver to. There's a lot of different sort of really tactical ways you can do it. But coming back to our running shoe example from before, if I say I had started a running store here in Raleigh, then one really cool type of content I might create is a set of maps that show you, if you want to do a 1 mile run, here are some of the greatest 1 mile loops around our community, or a 10-mile loop or a 3-mile loop. If you're warming up for a marathon, here's where I recommend, you do your training schedule. If you're going to create running clubs, you could create a map that says, if you want to run a mile, here's the morning mile club, and we're going to meet here and run this route. Come join us. So, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of share a story or create engagement by sharing a map. And it's toward the end of the book. And you're right, it's one of those less used ones. It's not perfect for every scenario. But I think it's nice to consider, is there a way, if we're trying to, there's just so many cool ways you could do that. Even if you're, where do you source your ingredients from? What areas, if you're a conference, where do all of our speakers and attendees, where are they all coming from? If you have shipping times, can you show a map of, the path that your, Uber uses a map to show you where you're riding? So it's just kind of like that prompt to say, is there a geographic element to this, or could there be? And is this the best way for me to share that?
I see. Yeah. I think with you're right. Like with the running shoe company, right? Kind of creates that sense of community. Like everyone's involved. Like this is where we're going to meet in the mornings. I think there's definitely opportunity there. So before I was, maybe a little fuzzy about it, but
sure.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing I remind people too, is maps can be used in non-navigational ways. So if you think about, maybe you're a Wi-Fi router company and you can provide a map of the home that they can explore to see, where should you put your Wi-Fi router? Where is it going to give you the best service in your home? Dollar Shave Club did a mapping your shave, showing which direction on the face you should be shaving where. Maybe you're a chiropractor and it's a map of your spine and what sort of stretches are good for which area, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be a map for getting around in the world.
Right.
It could be, maps of other varieties too. Just, is there an element of location that's important here? And if so, can we demonstrate that with some sort of map?
I gotcha. So you can really expand beyond geographical, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's
I
smart.
mean, you could do a map of your fridge. Like if you're a home organizing company, like where should you be storing vegetables and cheese and fruits?
Right,
And, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. A map of your closet, how to organize that. I mean, there's so many different ways.
Yeah, you can really get outside the box with it. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. So I know before you said when you were workshopping, some of these formats and focuses, you worked with real people to really narrow it down to like the 10 or the 20 best total, right? Let's say, as a company, I don't think that quizzes would work for me, or a timeline wouldn't make sense for, some of my content. Do you have any formats or even focuses outside of those, top 20 that you really focused on that didn't make the book that you could still recommend or for people to try out?
Yeah. So in the book, there's a chapter for each focus and each format. But the end of the format chapters, there's one called More Formats to Consider. So the goal with this book, I really tried to be platform agnostic. We're not talking about TikTok or, Instagram or YouTube. We're really talking about the core elements of the content itself, no matter where it lives. So we did recommend some additional ones you might consider there. Things like a course, which is kind of made up of, videos and writing and other formats, virtual reality, augmented reality. You could create a game, you could create an app. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that you could do it. A GIF, depending on what camp you're in, doesn't technically fall into one of those categories. So, there's always going to be new formats that pop up. I think hopefully if you have a strategic way of thinking about it and your choice is, does this story benefit from being told through this format? As long as it's that order, you're following that same mindset. You could really continue to adapt to subtract different focuses, different formats, and then add in new ones that make sense for you. As far as the focuses, I think the 10 that we picked ultimately encompass a lot of the content that is out there in the world. We haven't found too many, because I find myself like testing this all the time. Anytime I see a piece of content, I'm trying to map in my head which focus and which format is this, just to, see how well it holds. But I think there might be some that are individual to your specific business that might feel like they're sort of standing in their own. So I've had people say, well, testimonial doesn't really feel to me like it fits any of the categories. Now, to me, I would say that's people-focused content. It's a person talking about their experience, or it's product-focused content. It's purely about the product and your experience with it. But if for you, because of the way that your business operates, it feels like a separate category, by all means, do that, Right. So it really is just an adaptable system. My goal is just to help you realize there are a lot more ways to tell stories and to explore some of those before you make a decision that might just be a default reaction.
I gotcha. Are there any formats that you think maybe are dated or that just don't work that you see a lot of companies try out that you think maybe should stop now that we're in the 20s?
Okay. I don't ever like to say that something is totally dead, because there's always an exception. There's always some niche industry that they're all about that thing. I do think that we sometimes default to things like white papers or quarterly reports in a way that is not necessarily giving us the return we want. So my recommendation, whenever you're working on something that big, like an ebook or a report, I don't know, something of that nature, my recommendation is always to see how you could repurpose it into some of those other formats. So if we're going to do the 30-page ebook, on this topic, can we also create a curated list of the key stats from that, or a curated list of the best quotes? Could we get outside experts to share why they think the ebook is great and use that as people-focused content? Could we pull out the data from the ebook and make an infographic, just to really kind of extract as much value as you can out of that? Because I always say all of us can probably think immediately with some degree of shame of all the PDFs that died unloved in our downloads folder. We don't want to be that sad, lonely PDF in someone's download folder. So the more we can atomize that content, make it engaging, and introduce it to people in other places that's not just the downloads folder, the better chance we have of actually creating a relationship with our audience.
Right. It's really about stretching, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get as much out of it as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So the book's doing great. Are you working on a follow-up, or do you have anything in the works? Yeah, you got some new stuff coming.
There
Anything you
is.
can talk about, or is it kind of a
I can't
secret?
talk about too much, but
Okay.
I can tell you that I'm teaming up with an expert in the business space, and we are creating a book that is aimed at small business owners on how they can choose content that's going to help them prove their value to their audience. So it's sort of a combination of business communications and content marketing. We're trying to put those two things together so that we can help people align their goals with the way that they share their story with the world.
Any timeline here, or you can't share that? When can we expect it?
It's always hard when you're actually writing the book because you'd like it to be a little further away to give you more time to marinate. Maybe end of 2021 or early 2022. That would be the hope.
Okay, Melanie, I think that kind of wraps it up. Do you have any last minute shout outs, anything you want to announce, plug? Go for it.
Yeah, well, if anyone does want to check out the book and learn more about it, you can go to contentfuelframework.com, or you could find it wherever you buy books online, the Content Fuel Framework, How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas. My website is storyfuel.co, so storyfuel.co, and you could learn all about me, connect with me on social, check out how we work with companies, whatever floats your boat. And I just want to say thanks for letting me share my story.
Yeah, of course. And I will obviously link everything in our YouTube caption, so it'll be easy for people to follow and to find. All right, I think that's it. Melanie, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love getting to chat today.
Okay, bye.
For more episodes, including our webinar replays, please visit our Spotify and Apple Music pages. Thanks.